Hello, it's Miss Heather, piano and voice teacher at Conservatory of the Ozarks. And I'm going to try to answer the second question on my Hymnody study guide without looking at my notes. So, the question is the 1526 Deutsche Messe, which is not really a question, but anyways. So, in Luther's day, he felt there was a problem with church music. In his day, he felt the Catholic Church was full of corruption, which obscured and polluted the gospel. And a big part of the problem was that people were spectators during the worship service for two different reasons. One, the text of the songs was all in Latin. The people didn't speak Latin, so they couldn't understand the words they were singing a lot of the time. And secondly, the songs, the melodies of the songs, the music component of the hymns or the mass was complicated. It was, there were a lot of polyphonic choral settings that were really difficult to sing, not really accessible for amateur singers. So the singing was pretty much done by professionals, and the people were dependent upon the clergy to understand their faith, because they couldn't read the Bible in their own language and they couldn't understand the words they were singing to the Mass. The second problem that Luther saw was that there were not any hymns included in the Mass. At that time, hymns were only used in the context of church worship in the daily offices, such as matins and vespers, etc. Other than that, hymns were just used for private home devotionals. So Luther's solution to this problem was to create the Deutsche Messe, or the German Mass, and it came out in November of 1525, which is, close to Advent, right before Advent, but it's called the 1526 Deutsche Messe, and he wrote a hymn for all 11 elements of the Mass and Catechism, and he wrote the hymns in German, which was the common vernacular of the common man in his day and time, and he wrote music to go with the text, which was easily singable by an amateur singer, an amateur musician. So the text for his hymns, he wanted to teach a lesson and to be simple enough to be sung and understood by a child or a new believer, but to have depth so that you could derive benefit from revisiting the same hymn over and over again over time. Even if you're very intelligent or you've been a believer for a long time, there was a level of benefit from singing the song one time, even if you were not experienced in your faith, and there would be benefit to repeating the songs many times over and over again, even if you were mature in your faith. So with the Deutsche Messe, Luther was seeking to achieve Gottesdienst, the people's service. So people came to minister and to be ministered to. So Luther used the German Mass to get the people out of the pew and singing their faith. He transformed them from spectators into participants in the service. He inserted hymns into the Mass. He used troped Kyries and clausulas as a way to introduce people to having hymns in the Mass, because troped Kyries and clausulas were not controversial. They were already accepted, so that was an easy way to get an in without making everybody crazy, because it was too modern and experimental. Okay, so I think that's pretty much it. So let me check my answer. Okay, so in 1526, Martin Luther composed a German hymn for all 11 parts of the Mass and Catechism. Luther's completed work was known as the Deutsche Messe, or in English, the German Mass. The problem was the gospel was obscured. Congregants were spectators. The gospel was polluted by the corruption within the Catholic Church of Luther's day. Musical settings were too complicated for amateur singers. Polyphonic choral settings of the Mass were performed by professionals in the church service. Text for the Mass was in Latin. Congregants didn't speak or understand Latin. Congregants were completely dependent upon the clergy for salvation, as they could not understand the gospel in their own language. No hymns were included in the Mass. In the context of church worship, hymns were only used in the daily offices, such as Vespers and Matins, etc. Hymns were mostly used for the private devotions in the home. The solution. Oh, I forgot to say, Viva Vox Evangeli, the living voice of the gospel. Congregants became participants. Luther's didactic hymns enabled the people to sing their faith during the service each week. With the Deutsche Messe, people came to minister and to be ministered unto. Gottesdienst, the people's service. Luther wrote the German Mass in the common vernacular of the common people. Everyone could understand the text. Luther introduced hymns to the Mass. Luther used the uncontroversial troped Kyrie to introduce hymns into the service without shocking the congregation. Luther used clausulas as a non-controversial way to lead the people into singing songs with words they understood. I think I hit all of that. So, yay, thumbs up for me.